Well, hello and welcome. My name is Dan Meyer. I'm editor-in-chief here at RCR Wireless. Thanks for joining us. Today we're joined by Kevin Riley, who's the CTO and also the Vice President of Engineering at Sonus, to talk a bit about what's coming up in 2016. Obviously, we're getting near the end here of 2015, and hope to get some insight from Kevin on the topic. So Kevin, thanks for joining us. We appreciate it.
Thanks for having me, Dan.
Great. So I think a couple of topics I was hoping to touch base with you on looking towards 2016 would be virtualization, which is a big key word. I know 2015 was a big year for virtualization. 2014 was as well. But look ahead a bit on 2016 there, but also a little bit maybe on VoLTE and voice over Wi-Fi and those kind of VoIP technologies as they're kind of progressing as well. So maybe we'll start off with, I guess, your views and kind of where we are today. Maybe where do you expect us to go in terms of virtualization, whether it comes to NFV, SDN, cloud, all those great acronyms like that. So yeah, so maybe just a general view there on where we are, maybe where we're going there.
Sure. I think what we've seen through the majority of 15 and even starting before that is the majority of technology companies like Sonus have spent a fair amount of time virtualizing their applications, right? The telecommunications applications, building their VNFs, if you will.
Yep.
And in parallel with that, you've had kind of the service providers working through kind of the basic technology stand-up of the infrastructure that they want to put in place to start to host these VNFs. So they've been starting to make their way through the architecture, what the different technologies may be in play. And as we're starting to exit 15 and go into 16, what we're seeing is now these service providers are starting to pick some key VNF vendors to come in and help start to prove out that infrastructure, right? So we're starting to move from the kind of the evaluation phase of various technologies, who are thought leaders, what are some basic best practices, into now more of a proving out mode, where we're getting into the labs and really starting to make this stuff work. And it's an important step because this is all nascent technology. So there isn't a recipe for the service providers to do this. So what we're seeing is a fair amount of collaboration between the vendors and the service providers, whether it's in their labs or in consortiums like Open NFV, where everyone's coming together and really just trying to get this to work and figure out, with all the millions of settings and knobs and different configurations, what are the ones that work for our types of applications? So we've kind of moved from this phase of, basic architectural, I think this is what it might look like. We all got our VNFs in order. Now we're putting it together and really starting to make it work in the lab and, proving to people that, miracles don't have to happen for this, for us to make the transition from hardware into software.
Yeah, that's a great point. Obviously, and it seems like too that the telecom operators are really on board with this. Obviously, when they want to see this technology come onto the network, and unlike past evolutions when it came to technology, whether it was 3G, 4G, whatever, which maybe to an extent was kind of pushed onto them. This one seems like they're really kind of pulling it and hoping for the vendors out there to really kind of come up with solutions that work well. And like you said, it sounds like there's a lot of collaboration going on. So it seems like it's a different mentality going into 2016, where people are really looking for some big advances here in terms of kind of this move towards getting this stuff actually into the network at some point here.
Yeah, so I think the difference here is this isn't just an exercise to just introduce new technology. Yeah. I think a lot of the business models and motivation has been kind of vetted out through 2015 in terms of building the business case of why they want to move to software. In terms of, I think we're seeing kind of the services layer move very quickly. Services are becoming increasingly richer, increasingly more personalized, and this whole notion of moving from a static model of service delivery to something that's much more dynamic via software allows them to accelerate that service growth, that service deployment, adopt a fail fast, succeed fast model, move on to the next service, and really come up with elastic scale models so they can optimize their own costs. So I think there's really two kind of mega trends at play with these service providers. One is the offer. How do I accelerate my offer? How do I make it rich? How do I make it as flexible and minimize the time to when the user clicks I want the service to the time that it's realized, they can deliver it to the end user and bill for it. And then coupled with that is also this network optimization piece, where as we push more and more over these networks, if you have a static networking model, you pretty much have to design each point in your network for worst case. It's kind of like the highway outside my building here. It's got 5 lanes, but all 5 are only used around 9 o'clock and 5 o'clock. And in the middle of the day, it sits idle. And so moving to more of an NFV, SDN type model allows them to rebalance capacity, shift what they've paid for around their network based on business triggers and capacity models, and really monetize, their network much more effectively. So you kind of get this double whammy, which, it really sells itself. And, I think, you've seen the CSPs really rally around that.
Yeah, I've heard a lot of analogies for virtualization, but that one might be actually the best one I've heard, because that does seem to kind of capsulize where we're going with this. I mean, like you said, it's the ability to kind of the agility aspect of it to kind of scale up and down as needed. That's a great analogy for that. So I'm going to use that one in the future. So I appreciate that. I guess so. And obviously, does it seem like we're kind of beyond a bit of the hype cycle? I know, like going into 2015. Late 2014, there's a lot of talk about, 2015 was going to be this great year. We're going to start seeing some deployments out there. POCs are going to be ramping up. And, we're really going to be kind of seeing this move pretty aggressively in 2015. And it seemed like, maybe we didn't quite get to that level yet. But it seems like from what you're saying, at least from Sonus' point of view, you guys have a pretty realistic view of what to expect in 2016. I mean, obviously the hype part of it is always going to be part of this. But it seems like, you guys have a better understanding of maybe what we're looking at and not kind of getting all trapped up in the hype part of what's happening in virtualization.
Yeah, I really look at it along two dimensions. I try to think of the access edge and the customer premise application for virtualization a little differently than the core.
Okay.
There's a lot of this talk in the industry around virtual CPE. Taking things that are done in hardware on premise, like firewalls, routers, session border controllers, and doing those in software so they can be deployed almost remotely, managed remotely, so that you can minimize time to service turn up, minimize the truck roll. So instead of having someone go on-prem to turn up SIP trunks or a business class service, install 3 boxes and have to work with the IT guy, you could install a server and deploy that as software remotely and manage it from the core of the network. That problem, I see that virtual CPE space really materializing in 2016 as a real opportunity for deployment. Because if you think about the problem statement, it's a little simpler. They're smaller instances of an application. They're isolated per customer. You're not trying to build some massively elastic, fully orchestrated application beast in the middle of your core. You're just stamping out lots of smaller things at the edge. And those have their own challenges, but it's a more solvable problem, I think, today, and it's less of a leap for service providers to wrap their heads around. So I think in 2016, we'll see that really start to stick. We're actually exiting 2015 with what I see as some real virtual CPE type of opportunities, whether it's on the customer prem or at the edge of the access network to the CSP core. I think the part we're going to have to prove out through 2016 is really that fully elastic, orchestrated VNF in the core network, where you're running hundreds of virtual instances that may look like a single logical application that you can rebalance and spread around your network. That has a lot more moving components to it. It's by definition much more mission critical because it's in the core of the network. More traffic's going through it. The impacts of a failure are much higher. So I think in 2016 we'll see the core virtualization story prove out in the lab and really get hardened. And we'll see virtual CPE actually move into production and get deployed in 2016. So I think about them along those two dimensions. I don't like to clump them together because I do think there are two different thrust vectors here. One is moving ahead of the other. Yeah,
great point. And obviously, that trust part of it is going to be important with these telecom guys because they are very conservative companies out there. They don't like to change too rapidly, and they have a lot of history with what they've got in their network already. So their guys who are rolling out the networks, they don't want to change up things too quickly because they don't want to freak out when something goes wrong and have an issue there. So that's always the trust factor.
But I will say what we are seeing, even in the core side, is an absolute commitment from the CTOs, the CEOs, a lot of the technology EVPs to move in this direction. I sense an all-in with all the CSPs that we work with, and now you're starting to move past the technology teams into the operational teams. The teams that own that application running reliably, their livelihood, their job depends on that app running perfect in the network. And that is now probably the next hurdle we need to push through with the service providers is we have the full buy-in from the technologists in the company that this is the direction, this is the future. Now you're now butting up against the ops teams. Mm-hmm. And really, you just got to go in there and show them this technology running side by side, work with them to get them over that fear factor that we can do in software what we've been doing in hardware in your network for the last decade. And that's kind of where we are in the core is he's kind of working with those teams and pushing through that boundary to get them comfortable with technology.
Yeah, makes sense. Well, I guess for Sonus going forward, at least into 2016, on the virtualization front, what's going to be your main driver? What's going to keep you guys up at night, those long weekends. What's going to be, at least looking to at least the first part of 2016, what do you guys expect to be kind of your core focus going into next year?
For us, I think, we have the core technology in place. We have the VNFs. We've had them for a number of years now. So for us, it's really about pivoting the company to the proper business models. As you start to go from selling, into a static network, licensing being attached to something, pricing the way customers want to buy, scale, rebalance your product in their network, you're really moving to a pure software model. The easiest analogy I could think of is you're moving from a node block license to a floating license business model, and really kind of getting the business practices within our company built around that self-service portal, so customers can just go get more when they want, deploy it in their network, use it how they see fit. That's kind of focus area number one. Focus area number two is really rounding out the tool chains and the surrounding componentry around the VNFs. One thing we've noticed is, as you move from, say, a box to software, it goes in the cloud. Now you can't see it anymore. It's in the cloud. Is it really doing what it should be doing? How do I debug it? How do I know that I'm meeting my SLA? Really, the evolution of the tool chains in concert with the VNFs is just as important as the VNFs themselves. To get the customers comfortable with the technology and being able to deploy it, manage it in a way that's just as efficient, if not more efficient, than the old static model of hooking up a RS-232 port to a piece of hardware and debugging. The tool chains are absolutely key. So for us, it's kind of moving along the dimension of make sure we have the proper business model to support the way the customers are going to use this product in a software network, and then also really rounding out and kind of modernizing the tool chains to really be cloud ready in support of those VNFs as they turn up in volume in networks.
Interesting. So yeah, it's pretty easy work basically. Just a few long weekends and you're all done. So no big deal there.
You got to beat about our desk up here.
Very nice. Well, maybe just switch to the other topic I want to touch base with you a little bit on. It did seem like the VoLTE, the voice over Wi-Fi, all these new kind of ways to transmit the old standard of voice have really changed a lot. I mean, obviously 2015 seemed like a big year where we started to see some more VoLTE deployments. Even in 2014, some were kind of ramping up then, but it seems like 2016 is really going to be a year, it seems like, where there'll be a lot of focus on operators expanding their VoLTE and voice over Wi-Fi deployments, kind of bringing them maybe a little broader to the market, really getting more customers on board with it, hopefully. Obviously, a lot of standards and interoperability issues as well with that. I guess as you look towards perhaps that aspect of the market, what do you see happening going into next year? What's kind of your big focus for next year on that?
So I think, to your point, I think the VoLTE on-ramps are a little slower than we all expected. But coming out of 15, we're seeing some very good evidence that 16 is going to be a good on-ramp for VoLTE. And so our perspective is, we sit kind of on the prem, the access edge, and the core, but we do very well at the interconnect edge of service provider networks. And what we're starting to see is a lot of opportunity at that interconnect edge. So basically, VoLTE now egressing the CSP network. So what that means is, what that tells me is, the service providers spent 14 and 15 really getting their own VoLTE offer in order. You got to have the handsets, you got to have it built out. They've now proven it out in their own domain. And now they're starting to think about the user experience as they roam, right, and go into other networks. So that tells me that internally, the technology in their networks has reached a level of maturity where now they're worried about the user experience as they roam. And we're seeing kind of a lot of activity at that interconnect edge in terms of opportunity and network build out in the service provider network. And then we're also seeing, a good uptick in wholesalers who now want to get in on this action, recognizing that there is going to be a lot of VoLTE traffic going network to network, and they're throwing their hat into the IPX ring and starting to say, well, look, I'm going to start to repurpose my global network. I'll be a VoLTE hubber and start to carry this traffic. So the fact that they're now coming forward with bids and want to bid their network tells me that they also see and anticipate this on-ramp. It's imminent. And I think that's really going to push into 2016.
I mean, you guys are really going to be at a core crux of all this then, because, from the people I've talked to in terms of VoLTE, what you guys are working on, that interconnect layer of that aspect of it, that's going to be, that has been the big challenge. It's trying to get, kind of people talking the same language, basically. And you guys, it sounds like, are going to be kind of right at that intersection there, directing traffic and make sure people are working nicely with each other. And that's going to be an interesting aspect. I'm guessing you guys obviously have a lot of technology on board there to kind of make this work. As you look at making that part progress, or helping that part progress, what are you guys going to bring to the table there to kind of help along that part of this obviously very important process there?
So for us, I mean, we've sat at the interconnect edge and done interworking for a long, long time.
Yeah.
I mean, first and foremost, you have to be compliant. You have to support all the 4G standards, and really proven and certified with as many different core operators as you can. VoLTE's a little involved in terms of roaming and handoff and where the media is switched versus where the signaling goes. And there's a lot of intricacies to supporting that. And one of the challenges is that these call flows are much more complex.
Mm-hmm.
So the amount of processing you have to do per user per session only goes up over time, right? And you really need to get ahead of that, make sure you have the right platforms where you could scale and start to layer in these more complex services at that network edge. And then recognize also that VoLTE is not just VoLTE. Now you have things like RCS that's going to start turning up, and it's not just a voice call, right? And you have to make sure you're starting to build in the right capabilities of the products to really support multimedia at the network edge, right? Audio, video, text, presence. How do you move that across network boundaries? How do you interwork it? And most importantly, how do you secure it, right? So these are kind of the things we think about as we invest in our platforms and as we've geared up for 2016 and what we've built into the products.
Yeah, that was a great topic. And again, it does seem kind of interesting because it is, we all at this point take voice for granted. I mean, we've grown up, in wireless world, voice has always been the staple, and we've always expected how it works. And we kind of, have an expectation when you dial the phone, what's it going to sound like and everything. But you're right, this move towards VoLTE, it's a big change because if consumers don't accept it and aren't having an experience that they're used to, and a satisfying experience, obviously, that generates a lot of issues for operators. And that's something they obviously want to avoid at all costs. But it seems like, obviously working with an important vendor on this is going to be a big part of what they're going to do, and making sure that that they bring somebody on board who can work across operators and have all the standards in place and be compliant, like you said. That seems like that's going to be a huge part of that trust. Another trust level for these operators to make this next movement in VoLTE at least.
Absolutely, and I think we're right at the inflection point for that. That's what we see from kind of our business opportunity moving forward. That we expect this to the on ramp to be in 16.
Yeah, I mean, would you expect, I guess, the voice over Wi-Fi to be a very similar type of issue? Because I know on the Wi-Fi side, some operators are bringing it on board a little bit, but it's always kind of been held a little bit at arm's length because there's always the issue when it comes to you can't really control the service level, for instance, on some Wi-Fi networks. Do you expect a very similar type of movement toward in voice over Wi-Fi in 2016 as well?
We are seeing that.
Okay.
I think first and foremost, it's relatively straightforward to add architecturally to the offer. So it's not a huge investment to bring voice over Wi-Fi as an access modality into your core network. So the technology barrier is not super high. Again, it requires scale, a lot of good security capabilities because you are coming in over some unmanaged access network. But that being said, technology-wise, it's not that difficult to add to network. So we are seeing a number of service providers want to bring that on board. To your point, though, I think the concern there is that the quality of experience, and it's an unmanaged network. Is it better than what you can do on the RAN? Typically, what we're seeing is it's usually the threshold for switchover is you almost go down to almost no RAN, and then they want to just kind of move over to Wi-Fi, right, when you can.
Yeah.
So I think the service providers are going to have to kind of work through when they want to use it, when they don't. How does LTE unlicensed play in this whole in this whole equation? Because if you look at the premise of LTE unlicensed, you still always have that RAN connection as well, where they send the critical data, and you use kind of the unlicensed spectrum speculatively or when and if it's available, right? It's just kind of nice to have type of model. Wi-Fi falls in the same bucket. I think we've seen it on ramp. They're going to work through what apps and what the different criteria is to kind of start deciding what goes over what pipe. But you're seeing it built in natively into the handsets now. Usually once it hits the handsets, it's taking off. And we have seen, I will say, we've seen multiple CSPs move to build this into the architecture already. I think they'll start to kind of turn it up next year.
Yeah, very interesting.
And I also think, just to add, I think it takes a little pressure off of 5G as well. There's a lot of debate over when will 5G hit. Personally, I think that's out in 2020. In line with AT&T's messaging, I think Verizon's a little more bullish on it. But if you can adopt an LTE unlicensed or Wi-Fi offload strategy, it does take pressure off of the 5G migration and really allows the CSPs to really focus on the services and the offer to the end user as opposed to pushing more bandwidth.
Yeah, I mean, I definitely think 2016 is going to be a big year for some really important technologies that are really going to kind of drive where we go over the next 3 to 4 years. Because again, I mean, between now and whatever 5G comes out, like the 2020 or whatever it's going to be, we have this kind of time frame of 4 or 5 years here where the data demand is not diminishing. Consumers are using more and more mobile devices out there. So yeah, it seems like operators are really going to have to be on the ball, and it seems like 2016 is going to be a pretty important year to kind of get pieces in place and maybe commercially launched to really kind of drive with the virtualization front or kind of this new voice paradigm that's going out there. It's going to be an interesting year, 2016. It's shaped up to be.
Yeah, we're in a point of time where we're going through a fundamental transformation of the network architecture with NFV and SDN. You're seeing an unbundling of video. Now you can take your channels with you and watch them on almost any device that you're holding in your hand, which is going to just further tax the network. From our point of view, we see a flattening of the network. We're seeing all of the traffic fold onto a common transport. We're seeing the core have to support multiple modalities for access, whether it's wired, unwired, Wi-Fi, unlicensed, RAN. Pretty much everyone's going to share the same medium, and it's all going to have to be managed as you move to a whole new network architecture. So it's pretty transformative right now. There's a lot of good work to be done. It's exciting, and I think some things will move, as quickly as we hope. Some will fall behind, but I think there's a lot of good work ahead of us in 2016.
Yeah, and obviously a lot of work for you guys there at Sonus, so that'll be keep you guys busy off the streets at night and stuff like that too. So very important for you guys there.
That keeps us out of trouble.
Exactly. Very good. Well, hey, Kevin, definitely appreciate the great insight. Obviously, like we're saying here, 2016 is going to be a great year, I think, for terms of kind of the evolution here of these technologies. But obviously, you guys are going to be at the front of that as well. So appreciate the insight, and hopefully we can touch base too going forward on this topic as well. So thanks again for the time today.
Great, Dan. Thank you.
All right.